Wow, what a big fun day this has been so far in the Pacific Northwest. If you're a Seahawk fan, all sorts of breaking news today. In fact, no sooner had I started putting this show together to react to a trade with the Seahawks acquiring this guy, inside linebacker Ernest Jones from the Tennessee Titans. You know him well from his years with the Rams. Gave up one of our own and a valuable draft pick to get him. But then no sooner had that news broke than news that George Fant and Abe Lucas will be returning to practice this week. My reaction and analysis, your thoughts, questions, comments, and those of Bryce Coots of the Hawk Zone Rundown. He'll be joining me next as well as we react live to all of this. Let's get into it. This is Seahawks Forever, brought to you by BetUS.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
This episode is brought to you by BetUS. If you sign up for an account today over at BetUS.com, they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% sign-up bonus on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000. They've got all the odds and prop bets up already for Seahawks Bills. Head over there, check it out, and set up that account today. Just use promo code YouTube150 to cash in on that. Big day for the Seahawks so far. First of all, let's get into the trade. The Seahawks sending Jerome Baker after just 7 games as a Seahawk to the Titans, along with one of their 4th-round draft picks. Haven't gotten clarity yet on this. Maybe by the end of the show, we will, whether it's their own or a projected compensatory pick that they'll be receiving next year. So, but either way, a 4th-round pick and Jerome Baker go to the Titans in exchange for inside linebacker Ernest Jones. Spent his first 3 years in the league with the LA Rams, traded to the Titans in August for a late-round pick swap. So we'll talk about the difference in value when we get into this today as well. Ernest Jones, just 24 years old, although he does turn 25 at the end of next month, 6'2", 233 pounds. He came out of South Carolina in 2021, drafted by the Rams in the 3rd round, has racked up 364 tackles, 22 for loss, 5.5 sacks, 3 interceptions in his career. This is the last year of his rookie deal. We'll talk about the implications potentially long-term of this acquisition. If my math is correct, with his cap hit for the rest of the year with the games that the Seahawks have remaining and the games that he's already played, roughly around $2 million, something the Seahawks can pretty easily avoid it and might even leave them a little bit of room if there's another move to be had before the trade deadline on November 5th. Let me bring in our good friend, Bryce from the Hawk Zone Rundown podcast. Bryce, thanks for joining me again. It's always great when you're available when these breaking news things happen. Appreciate you coming in. First of all, just your immediate thoughts on the Baker trade, and then we'll get into some of the other news that's just come down the pike.
So when I saw this come through today, Dan, I was actually honestly shocked. I thought Baker was going to maybe go to the bench, or, you'd see Knight come in, because as you know, I've been one of the guys that's been really hard on what I've seen from Jerome Baker. I haven't been impressed with his run fits and a lot of things. And I think a lot of our run deficiencies in this last couple of weeks and stuff like that have been a big play of our linebackers and whether they can fit the run. And Baker's been a crucial point for me looking at him. I've seen him just do some horrible things where I'm just like, you have to be better. So for them to trade him, and yes, I get they had to add the 4th-round pick to upgrade that position in Ernest Jones. And, if people remember, Ernest Jones has been a thorn in Seattle's side when he was with the Rams. Like, we couldn't block him. He blew things up. And when he, Aaron Donald obviously retired this offseason, then when the whole discussion came around Jones of, he's going to be moved, there were people I was talking to that were like, Seattle's interested in this guy. Like, they want this guy here in Seattle, but the Rams wouldn't trade him in division. Like, that's just not something they're going to do. So they traded him off to Tennessee. Seattle's had their eye on a linebacker like this, and I'm shocked they were actually able to pull this off. But this also, to me, Dan, and I don't know how you feel about it, this shows me a change in direction and how this team is being constructed and how quickly they will pivot off a mistake and go and attack and be aggressive and get an upgrade on that position.
Yeah, that was something that was always a mark of Pete Carroll teams. There's some kind of famous stories along the way of giving up on guys quickly if they don't fit into the program. There have been some whispers. I've seen it just again this morning since this news came out that people, even legitimate reporters that cover the team, that are around the team, have used words like disinterested, that it just didn't seem like Jerome Baker ever really fit here. And maybe some of that was because he just, from the moment he arrived, he was hurt. He was still recovering from some surgeries coming out of his time with Miami, and he never really got healthy during the OTAs and the offseason program. And it wasn't until right at the end of training camp that he was able to play, and then he aggravated it. He was kind of in and out of the lineup. But even when he has been in, I to echo your point, it just didn't seem like he exhibited the type of play style and demeanor and attitude that we've seen in the past from Mike Macdonald defenses, and that they've talked about, the type of culture and identity they want to establish, and just, the missing run fits, the bad angles, and even when he's getting to the point of attack, not really arriving there with the purpose, just seemed to me like just another guy. And maybe the injuries kind of sapped that, because he was a very, very good linebacker in Miami. But to get a guy like Jones, and this is interesting me from a number of angles. Interesting to hear you say that they did have interest in the offseason. So that would indicate, again, that this is someone Mike Macdonald's had his eye on for quite some time. Rams fans were pissed when they traded him away. Like, in the same offseason, they lose Aaron Donald, their best defensive player. They lost probably their second best defensive player, and it never really made sense. They weren't tearing down. I don't know if there were attitude issues. I really haven't heard any of that. But to get him back in the NFC, I can't help but wonder, and that Tennessee defense was playing great, and he was playing great on it, but I can't help but wonder is this Roquan Smith all over again? I'm not saying Ernest Jones is the player Roquan Smith was, certainly not. But Mike Macdonald's first year as DC in Baltimore didn't start great, gave up 50 plus to the Dolphins early in that season, and that they really didn't find their footing until they acquired Smith at the deadline. It was a guy that fit what Macdonald wanted to do, and then you could see the pieces start coming together. Could this have that type of impact on this developing defense?
I think it actually absolutely has that ability to have that impact. I think you'll see potentially a switch in the linebacking core where we've seen Dotson primarily be the guy that's kind of been the Mac. I think there's a chance that Ernest Jones, once he gets more comfortable in here, he will probably take that role on. I think if you look at Jones's stats, and this is the thing, like you just alluded to, Tennessee's defense has done quite well. He's not going to have a big learning curve. He's not going to have to learn the intricacies of this defense. There may be some terminology changes from here to there, but Denard Wilson's running that defense in Tennessee, who was on Mike Macdonald's staff the last couple of seasons in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I expect Jones to play this weekend. I think he's going to be in the starting linebacking core with Dotson. And going forward, I think there's a good chance that this will be Tyrese Knight and Ernest Jones as our two linebackers going forward, because I think this is also an indictment and maybe in a little bit on Dotson's play too, as in, yes, Baker was struggling, but we're now going out and getting a guy that we see as a long-term fit. And we already have a guy that we drafted in this past draft. Dotson may not be a fit going forward because of this. So it'll be really interesting to see how this linebacker room shapes up going forward. But I couldn't be more happy that John Schneider, Mike Macdonald identified a weakness.
Yeah.
They went out and they upgraded on that weakness instead of going and doing what John's done in the past, which is, we'll get a 30-year-old veteran guy that had played good, or he's from the 2013 draft class, which John Schneider is notorious for doing, and grabbing these guys. They went out and got a guy that's already proven in the NFL that he is very good, and you've seen firsthand how good he can be when he played with the Rams last year.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. His adaptability and as you say, his ability to step right in, because Denard Wilson, having coached under Mike Macdonald, brought that scheme to Tennessee. So, not only does it give him familiarity in being able to jump right in, but also gave the Seahawks a 6-game sample size to watch him in that scheme playing the role that they would envision for him. And then to your next point, it's going to be fascinating to see what the next step is, because I reached out to a couple of people as soon as I heard this trade made. One of them, Corbin Smith, obviously credentialed beat reporter for the Seahawks, for Seahawks on SI and Locked on Seahawks. He got back to me right away and said, absolutely, they see this as hopefully a long-term solution, that they view Jones potentially as a foundational piece. And in that sense, very similar to the move to get Leonard Williams last year, a player that they coveted, had tried to get before, really liked. They got him. They gave up a little bit more for him than people maybe expected, or than certainly other teams were willing to. I can imagine the fact that we had to add a fourth to this, that there may have been a market for Jones and other teams looking to pick him up as well. But just the idea that they're looking for those guys. We knew at the beginning of the year, they go get Baker and Dodson 1-year deals that essentially a lot of us assumed it would be sort of an audition. One of those guys would end up sticking around long-term. I'm not so sure now because of what you just said. And Corbin echoed those sentiments as well, that he sees Baker as more of a fit at Mike, that Knight fits better at Will, and that those two would pair exceptionally well together. And that if they indeed have any indication that this is a player that wants to be here long-term, they may have locked down those two spots beyond this season.
Well, and the interesting thing is, like, I've seen a lot of people, Dan, go on about, oh, we gave up, why did we have to give up a draft pick to go get, Jones? And, some people are PFF slaves and saying, oh, well, Jones is rated worse than Baker on. You have to go watch the tape. You really do when you compare PFF stats a lot of the time. Jones is a better linebacker for this scheme than Jerome Baker is. But the thing with the draft pick is we're going to get comp picks, especially a fourth round, I think, either from Lewis or Brooks this year. So you're not really losing that pick. It's more of a enticing thing to get Jones. Maybe some team wasn't going to give up a fourth because they didn't have that comp pick coming back, and Seattle had the luxury to do that with their pick coming back from Brooks or Lewis in the offseason moves that they made. I look at this in the same light, that I think there's a real push from Seattle to get this done and get a deal done with this guy, because they were interested in the offseason. They've had the opportunity now to see him play in Mike Macdonald's style and realize, and Mike Macdonald, again, has probably ID'd him and gone, hey, look, this is a guy that can come in and help change this defense and get it going even more in the right direction.
Yeah, so our friend Chris Clough just tweeted this out the other day, kind of figuring in the projected comp picks into the formula. And so if you take a fourth away now, the Seahawks at this point have a first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 2 6th, and a 7th. So they've made some deals this year to kind of pare that down. But in a draft, and this is why I'm okay doing it. What are we hearing about this draft so far? A couple of months out from the start of draft season in earnest. Lacking in blue chip, big time, first round grade type upper end talents, but a very deep draft throughout at a couple of different positions. That inside linebacker position is one that's been very, very thin in the last few drafts. And I don't know if it's just because of the style of play in college with all these teams running spread, that college teams are basically playing so much nickel and dime. They're not really breeding true inside linebackers that can come up and shed blocks and fill gaps and play the run. And they're mostly producing coverage guys or sort of hybrid DB linebacker types. And so these guys are harder to find. They're harder to find in the draft, and they're harder to find in free agency, but they're also not paid a lot. And so if, when you look at what it costs to acquire Jones, first from the Rams with a late round pick swap, I think the Rams sent a 6th with him, and they got a 5th back. And then the Seahawks send a player on an expiring contract or a 1-year deal and a 4th to get him. That would give you some indication of what the market is out there for Jones. So I don't think this is a guy that's going to cost a ton of money. It's not going to cost Roquan Smith money or Terrell Edmonds money, right, to be able to get him in the offseason. And you may have just found your Mike for seasons to come.
No, exactly. And like you said, Dan, the college game, there's some differences between it and the pro game still. Like, you've seen a lot of adaptation in the NFL to what college is doing. But one thing I've seen this year more than I would say in past is a recommitment from teams in the NFL to the run game because of this too high look, lighter linebackers coming out of college. Hey, let's go run. Look at what Derrick Henry's currently doing, right? Like he's reinvigorated down there in Baltimore. You know, even Ken Walker and some of the runs he's been able to make this year. Linebackers are not the run stoppers they used to be. And the NFL offensive coordinators are taking eye to that and going, hey, look, these guys coming out aren't big enough. If we can get a lineman or if we can get to that level and we got a bigger back, they can run through these guys. And I think that's where a guy like an Ernest Jones is kind of a hot commodity because he does step in the hole and make impactful plays. There's a play I was just watching on Twitter of all 22 of him blowing up a center on a blitz in a game, like literally just blowing the center back and onto his butt and affecting the play. That was something with the blitz packages with Seattle when they did send Baker. You never saw him impact on a blitz. He got blocked up and washed out. Now we've got a guy that can actually affect the play that way well and bring pressure. It's going to be a big change, I think, for Seattle.
The other thing that's exciting about this, and kudos to people that brought this idea up earlier in the season, because I did hear it offered up as an option among, Twitter and other analysts that are out there. Devin Lloyd's the name we heard the most of, out of Jacksonville, the last year of his rookie deal. They declined his 5th-year option, another bigger kind of inside linebacker. But I think Jones makes more sense, at least for now, in a number of ways, because not only the things you mentioned, but his familiarity with the NFC West, of which the Seahawks have only played one division game so far. So he's going to be very, very familiar once they start game planning for the next game against the 49ers, the 2 games against the Rams, obviously his ex-team, and the 2 games against the Cardinals. But also the Titans already played the Bills this year. And so he's been through a week of meetings and game planned for the Bills and seen them live and in action. And so that, even if he only gets one practice this week, it feels like an opportunity where he could play. And then you look at last week, and I think this is what excites me the most about this. And you sort of touched on it at the very beginning. It's just the message it sends and where this team thinks they are and where this team wants to be. And the move to get Roy Robertson-Harris last week, and you see the immediate impact of that. And this wasn't a guy that I honestly wasn't very familiar with him at all. I had to dive deep on who Roy Robertson-Harris was. But my goodness, he looks like a perfect fit. And a guy that's here contractually for a couple more years, another one of those foundational pieces, even though he's 32 years old. But just for him to jump right in and play the way he did, and then the defense to come together the way it did and play better against a red-hot offense, now you add an upgrade at what we all kind of thought was the weakest position on the field. You start to get some of those DBs back again. Are you back to being as excited as we were before the 3-game losing streak about the ceiling and the potential of what this defense could be as a whole?
I want to see what they do as a unit. I'm not to that point yet of getting as excited as I was when we were 3-0 and we could see the potential. But what this does tell me, though, is from the previous regime to now, I think there's more of an understanding and more of a let's get guys that we can keep in this building for a couple of seasons and are going to be upgrades. And if we have to pay more with some draft capital or whatnot, then we're going to do that. But it's not we're going to go pick some guy that's like the backup to the backup because we see potential there. It's like, no, we're going to go get a guy that we know works, like Robertson-Harris. Like, I agree. I wasn't really familiar with him either, but you see the impact of that guy immediately. It wasn't like before where we'd go and get Frank Clark to fill a role last year. And we're like, okay, we know what Frank Clark was years and years ago, but he's not a guy that's going to have that impact now for us.
Yeah.
So I still think this team is in a building / potential playoff push kind of scenario. But these moves do give me hope that going forward for the years to come, even the Seahawks are going to be a much better team at identifying their own issues, self-scouting themselves and going, we need to address this, and going and addressing it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, you start to see the parts. Like the parts are better today than they were yesterday. And this last week in Atlanta was the first time we saw those parts sort of come together and look more cohesive than they had up until this point. But I think we were always going to hesitate to get too excited about this defense because of what we've seen from Dodson and Baker, that they're just, nothing more than serviceable. And we were going to have to kind of figure out a way to get by with them until either Knight was ready to make a bigger impact or they acquired somebody else. And so now you go out and make that acquisition at a guy that I think all of us agree is more talented, where the ceiling is higher for that individual player. And now the parts are better themselves. As they are now on the offensive line too, because right when we're getting ready to start this thing, I was so focused on putting everything together for this show and to talk about Ernest Jones that you were the one that alerted me to the other breaking news. And that is that both George Fant and Abraham Lucas are going to return to practice this week. Different scenarios for the two of them. Like, Fant not coming off the PUP list, not coming off as serious of an injury, so he might be ready to go sooner. But add that news to what we saw from Mike Jarrell, the 6th-round draft pick, the rookie on Sunday against Atlanta. How does that make you feel about the development of this offense potentially if we get those guys back?
The Seahawks are getting, what I'll say this, Dan, Seahawks getting healthy at the right time. Like, there is a weakness in this division, the NFC West. You look at the Niners and all the issues they're going through. The Rams have their own issues. And this is a team that is finally going and saying, hey, we may not be Super Bowl bound, but we can push for this division title this year with the right pieces in place. Now you're getting healthy at the right time. The 21-day window, I think it is, for both Fant and Lucas, puts them both at a point where they would return in time for the Niners game in 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Well,
but
yeah.
That to me is huge, because if Mike Jarrell keeps playing as well as he did, and say he starts this weekend and does well again, you really truly do now have a situation where if Abe Lucas is back, George Fant can now become your backup left tackle, and Mike Jarrell can be your backup right tackle, and Stone Forsythe doesn't have to see the field again.
Yeah.
That's the interesting part of this all to me is with Jarrell's development, if he can keep doing what he's doing, and this will be a test if he plays against Buffalo. They do have good edge rushers. But if he keeps playing and plays similarly to how he did against Atlanta, I don't see a way Forsythe gets back into this. And now you're going to be 4 tackles basically healthy for the rest of the season potentially, and you get your 2 cornerstones back.
Yeah, and I think the best thing about this is that because Jarrell played so well, and again, as you mentioned, kind of a soft landing for him. Atlanta came into that game, I think, with the least amount of pressures as a team and the least amount of sacks of anyone in the NFL. But he had to face Matt Judon, right? No slouch there, an outstanding veteran. So it wasn't like he was out there against a B team. It means that you don't have to rush either of those other guys back. And I do think that even in a vacuum, if Lucas wasn't ready, if George Fant is healthy, like legit 100% healthy, which even at the beginning of the year when he started game 1, it didn't look like he truly was. He's an upgrade right now over Mike Jarrell. We love what we saw out of Jarrell, but you would want Fant in there. But after seeing what Jarrell could do on Sunday, I had taken the attitude that, like, I don't care how long it takes with Abe Lucas. We may have found our long-term starter at right tackle. You and I were texting about that a little bit after the game. And so anything you get from Lucas at this point is kind of frosting on the cake. It's gravy, right? If he ever comes back, it kind of becomes like a reverse. I'm imagining one of those Russian tea dolls, right? Where it's like, well, we're excited about Jarrell, but Fant would be better if he's healthy. But Lucas would be better than all 3 of them if healthy. There's no doubt about that if we can get him back.
If you can get Lucas back to close to what his rookie form was, then you are literally in kind of heaven, because you now have a young potentially ascending tackle in Jarrell. You have Charles Cross as our left tackle. You've got, Christian Haynes is starting to look better each week.
Yeah.
And things I've been hearing is that Seattle is really high on Lamea at left guard. And they just are letting him develop and get more comfortable in that spot behind Tomlinson. and kind of moving, along with the plan that eventually he may be the guy next year. So there's a good chance, like if they can keep Connor Williams in this, that you end up with a very young and talented offensive line going forward that has more cohesion than it has in years past.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. And I do think it'll be fascinating to see the scenario play out if Lucas comes back and he's really healthy, like truly beyond whatever that injury was with the knee that took him almost a year and a half to figure out. Because, he and Charles Cross drafted the same year. Their contracts would be up at the same time, or they'd be eligible for extensions at the same time. Actually, Lucas a year ahead if they exercise the 5th-year option for Charles Cross, which I'm sure is a no-brainer. But it gets you to a point where if Jarrell can be that guy, then you don't have to worry as much about the prospect of re-signing Lucas. He's a guy that, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. He's a guy that might have some trade value, or you could just let walk in free agency, get a comp pick, whatever. Those are good problems to have, right? And I'm glad you brought up Connor Williams, because I think after the first couple weeks, I don't know that I was prepared to say this is a guy that's going to be worth significant free agent money in the offseason. It was hard to tell those first few weeks if that was him not being, 100% yet, taking some time to get back up to speed after the injury, or just the poor play of the two guys on either side of him on the interior. But Connor Williams is a guy the last couple of weeks starting to look like pre-injury Connor Williams, and a guy that you're going to want to keep long-term.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the thing, like, when they said he was going to start game 1, and I kind of said, well, let's see, like Sundell had been kept, Olu had been kept. And, I kind of said it's going to take him a couple weeks to get back to pre-injury. Like, he's got to get even. And the one thing I've even noticed with Williams a bit, and I don't know if you have done, he looks like he's put on a bit more weight. Like, he's not as skinny as he was when he showed up here to camp. He's put on a little bit more weight and size. And I think that's the fact that he's comfortable with his knee. Things are going in the right direction. And now he's able to really anchor and move guys around. Like, that was one thing I noticed in this Atlanta game, particularly. Like, there were a couple times he moved Grady out of the hole, like no problem, where earlier in the weeks, I think he struggled a bit with that, because you're still worried about your knee. You're in that kind of tight area where
there were times those first couple weeks,
someone goes the wrong way,
right back into Gino's lap.
Exactly. Yeah. So, because that was my biggest thing in this game with, the Jarrell playing and stuff, was it's the first time all year, really, I haven't seen the pocket collapse on Gino, where he had nowhere to move. And that was the thing I liked, was Gino was able to move, create. And that's one thing good quarterbacks have to do in the NFL to be a top 12, top 15 guy. You got to be able to make moves in the pocket and create throwing space for yourself, as long as there's leaks and not collapsing of the pocket. And that was the difference this weekend, is there was no collapsing.
Let's get to some comments up here. Everybody seems really excited. We got almost 700 people in here on the stream. Trade deadline news is always fun, right? I don't know. Growing up as I did, way back when, trades just never happened. You never saw significant players traded before. And I'd have to go back and try to pinpoint kind of when that changed. Now it's very commonplace. We saw DeAndre Hopkins traded this morning to the Kansas City Chiefs in a really, really interesting trade. There's all sorts of chatter. We don't know which way the Rams are going to go. It sounds like they're shopping Cooper Kupp. There's rumors about Matt Stafford. That just never happened before. Isn't this a lot more fun, though, when teams are willing to make trades, right?
It's so much more fun that the NFL trade deadline truly actually is. You look at like the NHL, you look at the NBA, there's way more news going around, way more movement. It's fun now that the NFL is starting to get that way. And you're actually seeing veteran players move with impact. Like you said, Hopkins is now a Chief. I think Hopkins may have a slight career renaissance down there with Kansas City with Mahomes. And, we go out and get a linebacker and upgrade that position with a young, talented player. Like, it's not like you're seeing the old trades where it was like a practice squad guy for another practice squad guy kind of a thing, or depth piece. Like, you're actually seeing movement of of that variety now.
Shout out Scott. Happy birthday. Little birthday gift from the Seahawks for him. Jared asks, does this mean a few more snaps for Tyrese Knight, at least while Jones gets familiar with the system? And could this mean letting Dodson walk this summer? We've touched on this a little bit already, but I think that's the pair that they eye moving forward. I think it's very clearly, and Corbin reiterated this, that I think they see, I think we saw enough from Tyrese Knight to get excited about him, and Mike McDonald certainly spoke highly of him. He looks like a guy that could be a special player, and you put him next to a guy like Jones, and man, you're set there for a while.
Yeah, no, and I think, the first part of this, I think there's a chance that we do see Tyrese Knight maybe in some more sub packages until Jones is a little bit more familiar with what's going on.
Yeah, it's certainly going to see him this weekend. Absolutely.
Yeah, especially this weekend. And even maybe against the Rams. And then I think after the bye week, when he has that whole week there to just kind of digest everything, you're going to see a different set against the Niners. And then for the second part with Dotson, I think this does lead to a question about what's Dotson's future and if Seattle really does view him as a piece, because one of your guys, Dan, and my guys that we love is Drake Thomas. And I think Seattle's high on him, and he's young. I could see them rolling with a 3 set of linebackers going into next year, and maybe adding through a draft pick another linebacker in there, maybe as a depth piece, but rolling with Jones, Knight, and then Thomas as a backup in that role with another rookie coming in, and letting Dotson walk. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with Dotson going forward.
Meads Real Estate says, I bet he plays this weekend. Dizzy91 says he'll play. Yeah, I don't think there's any question, based on the factors we touched on earlier. But the timing of it, too. I like getting out in front of this, not waiting until the deadline, making this move now, that 2 home games back-to-back against the formidable Bills, obviously, and then you get the Rams here, and then you get the week off before we go down to Santa Clara and face the 49ers again. It's really, I think, good timing to get this guy in and try to get this defense tightened up as much as you can. We'll still wait and see. Sounds like it might be kind of iffy whether Reek Woolen and Trey Brown come back this week. But as long as they do come back healthy at some point over the next couple of weeks, neither of those guys seem to have a serious ankle injury, just something they need to manage, that they're positioning this thing for the stretch run. And you pointed it out, man, there isn't another team in the NFC West right now that's feeling really good about themselves.
No, exactly. And I think that's maybe what John Schneider realized is, hey, we can make a push here, to potentially grab this division. And I think that's the one thing we might see from John Schneider going forward now, is even more aggressive moves from him to improve this team with youth talent rather than old talent. And, it's something that, I looked at with the old regime is Pete always liked his guys. Yeah. And I don't know if Seattle makes this trade if Pete Carroll's the guy, because I feel like Pete was always the guy. And this is something I loved about Pete to an extent. And some things that drove me nuts about Pete with certain players was he'd give guys constant leashes. And, sometimes it would pan out and it would work, and sometimes it wouldn't. And I feel like Jerome Baker would have been one of those guys where he's like, no, we can get him going. We got to do this. We got to do that. Instead of what Mike McDonald and John Schneider have done now, which is, no, it's not working. It's not going to work. Let's go get some piece in here that we believe is actually going to work with what we're doing.
Yeah. Give me just a second. Want to remind the viewers that the BetUS right now has all the Seahawks prop bets up over at their website. And currently, this is what they have. Buffalo as a 3-point favorite. Hang on one second. Let me just clear this up here so you can see the picture. Hold on. I need a producer. 3-point favorite currently. If you head over to BetUS, you can get 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit. Use promo code YouTube150 for that. Also, just a quick shout out to the guys at Manscaped. 11 million men use and love this product. They sent me their brand new electric foil shaver, the Chairman Pro. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks. I have never been able to use an electric shaver. Bryce, I don't know if you've been able to or not in the past, but they couldn't shave me close enough. This thing is amazing. And right now you can get it for 20% off and free shipping over at manscaped.com by using the promo code Seahawks. Thanks to both of those sponsors for taking care of us here at the show. By the way, all the other ways, if you want to support the show and in any way that you can, those things are all listed down below in the description. Let's talk about this Bills matchup now. I mean, all of the negativity we were feeling a week ago, coming off 3 straight losses, it's now you go on the road, you beat a good Falcons team, at least a team that had been red hot on offense anyway. Now you make this move, you get some good news on some injuries, guys coming back. 3 points seems a little light to me for a Bills team that's playing as well as they have been, and a guy like Josh Allen who is firmly in the MVP conversation. Are you surprised the line's a little light like that?
I am and I'm not at the same time, because one thing for me watching the Bills, and I always like to watch the Bills because I grew up watching them as much as the Seahawks because of Doug Flutie. I'm a big fan of Josh Allen and what he's been able to do. So I kind of watch the Bills when the Hawks aren't on. And the one thing with the Bills is they're good, but I don't know how good their depth is. And I don't know how much Josh Allen can keep playing interception-free football. And as we both know, when you come into Seattle and it's not a place that they're familiar with, it can be a bit of a task to move to a silent count and a couple of those other things. And I think there's a chance that Seattle could, if they can again control the trenches, have a chance here. Like the Bills have a good offensive line, but if you can get pressure on Josh Allen and you can keep some sort of, sense of control on him and his movements, he's going to throw balls into areas where there's the potential for interceptions to be had or deflections to be had. And we have a talented secondary. If we get Reek Wolin back, which I think he's starting to practice today, was the rumor he was going to try and practice today. If you get him back, Nehemiah Pritchett looked pretty good. Witherspoon,
Josh Jobe looked good.
Josh Jobe looked good, and you've got some of these young guys. I think there's a very good chance that Seattle can create opportunities for themselves to be much more in this game than maybe people think. And that's not saying I think Seattle can win. I'd love to see them win, and I think the Bills are a better team, but any given Sunday, sometimes things just break the wrong way for the favored team, and it works out for the underdog.
Yeah, certainly a scary offense there, although it seems like James Cook has sort of cooled off in the last couple of weeks, and the Bills haven't really run the ball that effectively the last couple of weeks. But, you've got Josh Allen. He had Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, the big rookie out of Florida State, and then they just add Amari Cooper to that, Dalton Kincaid at the tight end position. Although, interestingly enough, they come in sort of the antithesis of what we saw with the Falcons last week, where the Falcons had scored 100 points in 3 games leading up to last week's contest. Right now, the Bills, let me put this graphic up. I just got this today. Over the last 4 games, if you see them all the way over to the left, that's percentage of 3 and outs. And right now they're 3rd worst in the league, right up there with the Patriots and the Raiders at number almost 40% of their drives over the last 4 weeks have ended in 3 and outs. Conversely, look all the way over to the right side, and you see the Seahawks through the last 4 games at the 2nd lowest rate of 3 and outs right there with the Atlanta Falcons, who had come in red hot to that game last week. So, a chance for Seattle maybe to take advantage of that, sort of like they did last week. I thought they did a really good job in Atlanta of really identifying where they could attack the Falcons and sort of took those weaknesses of theirs and compounded them. Maybe a chance to do that with the Bills and take advantage of an offense that's kind of, even though they put up 35 points last week. So it sounds a little odd to say the offense is not struggling, but a little start and stop. Maybe not the well-oiled machine the Bills would hope they were at this point in the season.
And I think that, Dan, leads into their boom or bust offense. So they really do run. And Buffalo's been known for it for the last few years. Even when Ken Dorsey was their offensive coordinator there at points, they weren't we're going to sustain drives. We're going to try and score quickly and, play, shootout football with you. And just looking, sometimes I do use PFF. And this is one thing that I find interesting is Josh Allen has a big time throw percentage of 6.38, where Geno's is 3.24. The big one for me, though, is turnover worthy play percentage. Josh Allen is sitting at 4.26. Geno's at 2%. That's where you see, I think, with your graph, it can kind of correlate into that is big time throws. If they don't pan out, you're now in longer situations to try and convert, and they're harder to convert in the NFL. You look at what Geno's doing now, and this is the one thing that I really have liked about Geno's evolution within Ryan Grubb is the intermediate passing game has really developed for them, and there's more stuff in the middle of the field to extend drives. And that, I think, was on full display in the Atlanta game. And that's something I think against this Bills defense, without having Matt Milano in the middle of that defense, is going to be a big thing.
This is I'm about to put a comment up on the screen, and I love this stuff because this is anytime something like this happens. The first place I go obviously is to find out everything I can for how it impacts the team in the moment. But then I quickly shift to big picture and looking at next year's cap and how it can all work. And is this a long-term move? This right here, one less linebacker to draft and one more pick to help build the O-line. Assuming that the Seahawks are able to re-sign Ernest Jones and keep him long-term. It is when you think about building this team and this roster to championship level, and you start to cross things off the wish list, things that will be priorities going into next offseason in order to put this team over the hump and really get them up to the level of the 49ers. Inside linebacker a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, heading into the season was something that we were all in wait and see mode. Let's see how Baker and Dodson perform. Let's see what we get out of Tyrese Knight as a rookie. But this is still something they're going to have to address again next year. Well, now we've seen enough of Knight to know he's a legit prospect and a guy that we like. And now you add another piece, you can start sort of whittling down the wish list for next year's draft already.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's something, again, that I think is huge in their self-scouting of themselves and not pushing problems off to the draft and hoping things pan out in the draft. You've gone and addressed it. You've gone and got a piece to it to add to a piece you got in the draft last year. Now, if they take a linebacker in the 5th or 6th, okay, you're a special teams role guy. Like, we're going to develop you as best we can, but it's not a pressing need anymore. Like, It's not something we need to do something now about. If you can keep Jones and you got Knight, those are two very good young linebackers. Like, again, this is the other thing I love about this trade. Jones turns 25 at the end of this month. It's not like we traded for a guy that's 29 turning 30.
Yeah.
We got a young guy that still has 5-6 years worth of good football still left in him.
And it gives you the opportunity in the draft also to take a shot at that position at a guy with upside that might take a little time to develop. You could take another Tyrese Knight type because, as we mentioned earlier, those finished products and those polished inside linebackers just aren't coming out of college at a high rate these seasons. This is always interesting, too, when you start to look ahead. David Wheelock says the next draft target with the first 3 picks is defensive end, slot receiver for third down and red zone, center, guard. Well, that's four things for 3 picks. But anyway, not to give you too much mess there, David. Way too early to be able to get that specific without looking at the draft class and certainly without knowing what our needs are between now and then. But I just wanted to put this up and make this point for this reason. I think it gets overlooked. Anytime you think a position is set, it's never set.
Yeah.
Every single draft I go into, every single one, depending on the draft class, obviously, and what's on the board when you're selecting, I'm looking to add to the front 7. I'm looking to add defensive line. Don't think just because they have Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams and a couple other dudes, you're always looking for game wreckers there, and having another one there, if you're trying to build a team through the trenches, is never a bad idea.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Ben Baller says, anyone got a left guard? I think this is probably, if you're in need of an offensive lineman at the deadline, probably the hardest position to try and find and acquire, because even bad teams, even teams that are out of it, probably aren't giving these guys up. And I'll use one specific example. You look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are not just quickly falling out of any hope of a playoff race, but also, like, is Doug Peterson even going to make it through the season? Is he going to be the next head coach to be fired? Major questions there. ESPN just put a piece up today about which teams are buyers and sellers and suggested that they sell. So they're not going to move off young offensive linemen that have any potential. I don't think you're going to get a Cam Robinson away from them. But a Brandon Scherf, maybe. A guy who's on the other side of 30, who's in the last year of his deal, who's making some money. If the Jags don't think they're going anywhere, maybe a guy like that's available, but that's the exception to the rule. Those guys are really hard to find at the deadline because they're just hard to find generally, and teams aren't going to give them up. Even if you're a bad team, you're going to try to hold on to your offensive lineman if you can.
Yeah, and that's why I think you see the issue Seattle's had over, however long, like we've talked about with the guard and the interior line plays. it's not easy to pry teams away. You have to pay for it. It's a premium now. And you can't rely on the draft to give you guys that are going to turn into starter level players. So, that's where, again, a Brandon Sheriff, yeah, you could probably maybe pry him, but it's going to cost you to pry him still, because Jacksonville may be that fringe team that's like, oh, we're not completely out of it yet when the deadline comes around. If you want to get him out of here, we need more compensation to set ourselves up if we're going to completely fold in camp for the rest of the season. I'm solely in the thought process with Seattle that in the offseason next year, when they do clear up some of this cap space with the restructures of contracts or extensions, that I think they're going to really take a hard look at who's in-house and who can they go and get in free agency. I think Seattle might be bigger players than we've ever seen in the free agent guard center market if they don't get Connor Williams re-signed, to add pieces in there, because I think more than ever, John Schneider's seeing that as a deficiency, and I think Mike Macdonald's going to let him know this is a deficiency for us. When you listen to his post-game press conferences and how much he talks about getting K9, how Geno operates, you can see what happens when Geno actually has a cleanish pocket to operate. He's very, very good. And Ken Walker's a very good piece. So it'll be interesting to see how Seattle addresses that going forward.
So let's talk about the cap. First of all, I wanted to address this comment because I'm not sure who James is talking about. He won't be here in a couple of years. We'll waive him in the offseason. He's overpaid. That's why the Jags traded him. I don't know if thinks
Robertson Harris.
He must be talking about Robertson Harris.
Yeah.
And to that point, Robertson Harris has some decent cap hits the next couple of years. I think it's $6-ish million next year, $8 million the year after. None of that money's guaranteed. If they want to keep him, they could easily restructure, offer him a new deal at a lower cap number. Before we get some of these others, I do want to talk cap. Hang on a second. Here we go. Because we haven't even mentioned this yet. This move actually creates cap space for this season as well. So Jerome Baker's cap number was $6.8 million. Ernest Jones was it was just over $3 million. I did the prorated math. It would be about $2 million for the rest of the year. So if you take Jerome Baker's, and right now over the cap shows the Seahawks as having $9.5 million in cap space before this trade. So just to do some quick math here, if you take Baker's and you divide it by 17, and then the 10 games that are left. So he had about 3.9, almost 4 million remaining. So the Seahawks just cleared about another $2 million in cap space here too. If there was another move for them to make, they have the financial flexibility to make another big swing. If there was something else out there that you think might entice them, outside of the obvious, would offensive line be your answer if that move is there to be made?
I think it would be offensive line. And I think what's going to happen is I think it's going to be that situation this game. They're really going to take an evaluation of this, because Buffalo's, they don't have Von Miller this game, but they got Ed Oliver. And if that interior of our O-line gets eaten up by Ed Oliver, I think there's going to be another move potentially made by Seattle where they may go out and get themselves a guard. And they may, hey, we might have to give up a higher round pick, maybe a 2026 pick potentially in the second or third round, to go up and get somebody that's on one of these teams that's kind of out of favor of potentially making the playoffs, and go getting an upgrade at guard. And a team I'd also look at is Cleveland. What is Cleveland going to look like now that, Deshaun's out of it? And, they've now given, Stefanski's given away his play calling to Dorsey. To me, there's a lot of turbulence going on there with that organization. They may be looking to move on from one of their guards.
Let me ask you this, because the other thing I was going to add on to that is I think anytime someone that can get after the quarterback and wreak havoc up front is available, if there's a guy like that out there, I think the Seahawks would be open-minded to adding yet another player up front on defense. What if the Cardinals make Budda Baker available?
Oh, that's interesting.
That one would be tight money wise. His cap number this year is 19. So roughly $1 million a game left, probably on that, a little bit over $1 million a game. So you're talking $10 million. I would suck up just about everything left when it comes to cap space. But, a guy who's obviously has ties to this area, can play that sort of hybrid role, dual role, can play close to the line of scrimmage. Probably in some ways is everything Mike Macdonald would look for in a safety, but they've already got some investments tied up there at the safety position. And I don't know, that's just the one big swing out there that I think a lot of fans would probably get excited about.
Yeah, they would. The only problem I've got is the same thing we ran into with Jones in the offseason. The Cardinals aren't going to trade him within the division. They especially with Seattle and the Arizona having to play 2 games after the trade deadline.
Yeah.
That's where I could see it being, where that trade wouldn't likely happen. And the thing is, I think
it'd be different if they were 1-6,
Yeah. I think McDonald's actually, the way he talks about Kobe Bryant is very interesting to me, because I think he's extremely high on Kobe.
Same.
And I think there's a chance that Kobe Bryant, if he continues to play the way he did and gets better each week, I don't think Rayshon Jenkins is coming back in as the starter. I think they're going to roll with Kobe.
He looks like a more physical player to me, and has ever since they made that transition. I know there was a play that first preseason a year ago after they started playing him at some free safety and strong safety, and he came up and hit a guy, and I thought, okay, I see a safety there.
Yeah.
I thought he played a big role on Sunday, and that was really exciting to see. And just the level of, we heard so much in the offseason about how good this coaching staff were as teachers. And I think that was a hard thing to kind of reconcile over the first few weeks is, well, if we're seeing missed assignments and missed gaps, is that a teaching issue, a coaching issue, or a talent issue? And now with some of these moves we're seeing, maybe it's the team acknowledging that sometimes it's just talent too, and you can't make a guy be in the right place. And if Kobe Bryant's ceiling is higher and they think he's a better player, they talk about being honest with themselves. I think we could see some of those changes, and guys aren't just going to be automatically gifted with their starting spot when they come back.
Agreed.
Let's see here. What do we got? Let's give a couple of shout outs here. Rockman Drums. How you doing, brother? Everybody here in the comments pointing out that Ernest Jones just played against the Bills. So that's some really valuable information to have. This is a question Hawks fan Matt asks, why did the Rams trade Jones in the first place? I don't know, but teams don't make these types of moves blindly, especially when it comes to draft capital, which they hold on to so dearly. That, John Schneider knows so many guys in this league, and you talk about the connection. If there was any issue with Ernest Jones in that locker room or internally that might have played any sort of factor in them trading him initially, to me, that would be mitigated by the fact that Mike Macdonald knows Denard Wilson, and he's going to get an honest assessment from his former assistant coach about what type of player and what type of dude Ernest Jones is, and they're going to see on tape how he fits and his effort level and all of those things. I don't think, given that kind of inside information, I don't think they make a move for a guy that they're not sure about. The guy as
no, they don't. And the reason the Rams traded Jones, it's pretty well documented that they couldn't afford him. Jones was in line to get, with his play, a pay upgrade, and they couldn't afford to do it. And Jones wasn't going to come back and play unless he got some significant bump in his contract. And I remember McVay going off on a reporter when he asked about the Ernest Jones situation and why they were going to potentially have to trade him. And it was this offseason, and McVay was not happy. Like, there were other things that were, kind of when Bobby had left, and he had kind of been the guy that had tutored Jones when he was down there with the Rams and got him to the way he was playing. And then you had Aaron Donald at one point, and I think his document, I reposted on my Twitter today, that Aaron Donald kind of turned to Ernest Jones when he retired and said, hey, this is your defense now. Like, you're going to be the guy. And then Jones is gone in the same offseason as Aaron Donald. So Rams fans are not happy this guy's gone.
Now, just looking at some other linebacker salaries, thinking ahead to next year, especially guys that are a little bit younger and have signed recently, that he might be he's not Roquan Smith or Fred Warner. You're not going to be having to worry about paying $19-20 a year in average annual value right now. Smith at 20 tops the list. But you guys, some of the other younger guys, I look at a guy like Patrick Queen, who played for Mike McDonald and was the second best linebacker on that roster, but 25 years old. And really who was on a career arc where it took him a couple of years to kind of get his feet under him. That's 13.6 million average annual value. You look at a guy like obviously Jordan Brooks, who moves on from here. And there were some questions about his game, maybe not being complete, also coming off, had a serious injury in his past, 8.7 million. So somewhere probably in that range. If you want to keep Ernest Jones long-term, you're talking 9 million to 11 million a year. But also, if you think he's a foundational piece, like Corbin Smith says, and a guy that you think is going to anchor your defense, probably wear the green dot, you also have 3+ years of Tyrese Knight on a rookie 4th-round deal also. So you're not going to be paying big money to your other linebackers.
Totally agree, Dan. And Brady Henderson's also come out with, as well as Corbin, and said, hey, look, like Seattle views this guy and really wants to get this guy locked up long-term. And when both those two guys are saying that and how well they're connected, tends for me to make a connection there that, hey, look, John Schneider made this with Mike McDonald being like, this isn't just a rental. We're going to get this guy to bring him in to be a guy that can be a linchpin in our defense.
I could see, and I think there's some other guys. This will be a fun conversation to have, I think, over the next month or so, maybe the bye week. There's probably some guys on this roster that they would be interested in extending now if they could. And I would think that if Jones gets in here and indoctrinates himself into this scheme and in this locker room as seamlessly as they hope, and he's the fit that they're hoping he is, and giving up this kind of capital to get him, maybe they try and get it done before the end of the year so that they just don't have to worry about it.
I think that's a very high possibility.
And for those fans, I don't see it here in the comments. I'm kind of surprised because it's usually the first place that a lot of people go who might think, hey, we don't have any cap space for next year. Right. We can't re-sign any of these guys, and we have other dudes we have to take care of too. Not to dive into it too technically, we'll do this as we get closer to the halfway point of the season. Yeah, according to Over the Cap right now, the Seahawks are essentially even. They have about $300,000 in cap space for next year. They can create. I've played around with the calculator recently. I think you and I were talking about this just last week, and there's a easy path to clear between $40 and $60 million for next year's cap without having to sacrifice some of your better players. You can redo deals. And it does seem now like with Joey Lane now as the cap guy that John Schneider's a little more open-minded to creativity, adding void years, things like that. Maybe a little bit more open to some of the, let's call it mild kicking of the can down the road, not to the level of the New Orleans Saints or the Dallas Cowboys or the LA Rams and what they've done in the past, but in a responsible way, being able to use some of those loopholes and some of those tricks that you can to get future cap hits down so they can keep everybody. So don't worry. Like we've looked at this, we've done this, we've gone over this. The Seahawks can bring everyone back next year, including Geno and DK and all of the others by tweaking a couple of things within their cap. So an Ernest Jones deal wouldn't get in the way of them doing anything else. Let's see. What else have we got here? Let's go to the end. Sometimes I get caught up going all the way back to be chronological. This is interesting. Misfit says Queen's been a train wreck with Pittsburgh by most accounts. Look, there were some questions about him. A lot of Seahawks fans after we hired McDonald wanted us to go after Queen after we lost Brooks, and that would have made a lot of sense. But at the money that they paid him, there were questions about whether he was that type of player or if he was kind of the product of that scheme, that system, and also playing next to a guy like Smith. This guy says Matt Milano's deal is a good comparable. Let me go back to that. We go cap space by position here. Matt Milano, who once again is hurt for the Bills, right? He's not playing Sunday.
I don't believe so. I believe
Matt Milano is 30 years old, so it's his third deal. He's at 14.1 a year. Again, I don't know that that's an accurate comp, that he's going to be that close to the top of the range, because I think if that's the way teams viewed him, sort of across the league, I think the Rams would have got a lot more for trading him in August, and it might have cost the Seahawks even more than it did today to acquire him. I think trade acquisition. The guy's been on the market twice now. And, Roquan Smith got a second and a fifth, right?
Yeah, I believe he did.
Yeah. I mean, that's nowhere near the kind of money that or draft compensation that teams were willing to give up to get Ernest. Real Broly says, hey, we should re-sign Dodson next season. I mean, look, I don't think either of us are saying we're willing to give up on him. He's shown some good things.
Yep.
I mean, the thing to me that separates him from Baker is when he does come up into the hole and meet the ball carrier, he does so with a purpose. It's a little bit more violent than what Jerome Baker gave you. I do see some things in Dodson's game that I like, and he's still just 25 years old, right?
Yeah, you could see it where this might actually make Dodson play better going forward with having Jones beside him. And we see, maybe Dodson's struggling a little bit being the Mike, and with Ernest Jones coming in and Dodson maybe bumps out to that will spot, he might be better suited to be out there. So it could, pay dividends for Dodson as well.
It's interesting. We had a conversation on a live show a couple of months ago about blue chip players, and, you start to see little by little guys ascend, and you add a guy now with that type of potential at the inside linebacker position, one of your weakest spots on your roster. And then the comments this week from Mike McDonald that he feels like Derek Hall and Boye Mafe both have all pro potential. Man, you can really start to get excited about this defense.
Exactly. And, it's kind of interesting for me because we're talking, earlier there, Dan, about cap implications and clearing up space. One guy I think that's going to be really interesting this offseason is Chenna and what they're going to do. If Mafe and Hill and Hall keep going on the trajectory they're going and the way they're playing, that might be one of those guys that you have as a cap casualty, and you create space by moving on from Chenna or restructuring his deal if he wants to stay here at a lower cap hit.
Yeah. Because
ever since he signed his extension, he's been injured significantly, right? So that's going to be something I think will be, an interesting kind of situation.
Certainly. I mean, we all love Chenna. We love his game. We love the impact he has in that locker room. But, if you've got two guys in Mafe and Hall who have established themselves, and if the team's not convinced Chenna can stay healthy, he's another one of those levers that I'm talking about that you can pull for next year, because all of the guaranteed money on his deal, I don't think there's any beyond next year. So he's a guy that maybe coming off a couple of bad injury years, he would be willing, if he wants to stay and be part of this, to reduce his cap number and redo his deal. He also could be a guy that would probably, if you just wanted to move on from him, he's going to have some trade value, right? I mean, Chenna's probably not a guy that you're just going to have to cut.
No, you could probably move Chenna. I would see the potential of Schneider going to Chenna and saying, hey, let's rework this. Like, if you like it here and we like you in the system, you bring so much to us, in the locker room and everything, let's rework this. And, Chenna might take that and go with it. So it's going to be interesting. I just think he's one of the not nearly talked enough about situations in the offseason coming forward of what we're going to do because of the emergence of Hall and Mafe. And the thing that I love is two of the guys that I've been so high on since they've come into Seattle are Kobe Bryant and Derek Hall, and how everyone had written them, both of them off. Like, people were writing off Hall already this offseason. You and me talked about it numerous times. And we kept saying it's probably a scheme thing. Like, there's something wrong with the way Pete and that defense and Clint Hurt were using them. Now you look at how Mike McDonald and Dirty have, used this guy, and he's turned into a force. Like, a couple of his rushes in this Atlanta game where he just took the tackle and speed bull rushed him right back into Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
It was unreal to watch. And Draymond Jones benefits from it. There's another guy that's now all of a sudden found some, resurgence in his game. Because I agree with you. That was the best game Draymond Jones has played in the Seahawks uniform.
Yeah, he had that one drive where it was all him. Like, he just dominated on that drive, like 3 back-to-back plays, and he did it in different ways. I think they've really found a spot for him. I think as long as those other guys are healthy, right? The Detroit Lions game, some people point to, and they're like, well, how come he wasn't able to really make his presence felt there? They had to move him inside because of all the injuries that week. It's not really his spot. I think he fits better on the edge. and just kind of turn him loose. And he looked really, really comfortable. Just looking ahead to next year, the thing to keep in mind, you can start breaking down like full numbers and cap hits and dead money and all that. But when you want to look at flexibility, if any of you want to just take a peek at 2025 and figure out how much flexibility the Seahawks have, go to the team calculator. I prefer over the cap to spot track. I just like the way it's formatted. And look at 2025. Look at guaranteed salary. That's what gives teams flexibility. If a player, no matter how big their cap hit is, if they have no guaranteed money, then it opens up the possibility the team can convert salary to bonus. You give the player more money in hand up front. It allows you to lower the cap hit and extend the deal. Right now, here are all of the players under contract for 2025 that have zero guaranteed money. Significant players: Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Draymond Jones, Leonard Williams, Uchenna Nwosu, Noah Fant, Julian Love. And then you get down into Jason Myers, Rayshon Jenkins, Michael Dixon, Boye Mafe, George Fant. Those are all guys that have zero guaranteed money next year. So again, this team they could re-sign all the players we want them to keep and go out and make some significant moves in free agency, as you alluded to earlier. All right, let me just check and see if there's any more breaking news that we have to react to.
I haven't seen anything, Dan. I've been kind of going up and down to see if there's anything that's come out. I haven't seen any more breaking news in regards to the Seahawks so far.
Yeah, at this point now, we'll just be waiting to see what the injury report looks like today after practice, especially on Reek Woolen. Let me see. I'm going to take a look at this. Michael Sean Dugar just reposted something that said there's a little more insight here to hang on. I'll need to sign into that. Let me do this while I'm looking this up. Hang on a second. Sorry, I know this doesn't make for great.
Are you hopping into the Athletic article he just wrote?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But when I pulled it up on my computer, it didn't log me into my account, and so I'm having to do it on my phone. Let's see here. Okay, this is from multiple guys. Let's see, according to multiple. I just want to kind of give as much context to this as possible. Yeah, it's still just really surprising that they moved on from him when they did, talking about the Rams after the year he had last year. 145 tackles last year, 14 tackles for loss, 7th most in the league amongst off-ball linebackers. Yeah, they just talk about it. We've touched on most of it. Jones has experience in the Seahawks' new defensive system. Okay. So this is written from one of the reporters who covers the Titans from his perspective. He says the way Jones was playing and backing up his reputation as a leader with the Rams. So yeah, there was nothing other than money that led to the Rams wanting to move on from him. So it makes even more sense to me that the Seahawks would make a move for this guy because they just love leaders. They can never stock too many of them in that locker room. It figured he might be one of the guys the Titans decided to keep around through the process of trying to become competitive and relative again. But this move means they parted with the 5th round pick for Jones, ended up with a 2025 4th and a 2026 6th, plus Baker for the rest of the season. It's also worth remembering the Titans drafted inside linebacker Cedric Gray in the 4th round in April. And then it says, Seattle admits defeat on Baker experiment. Trading Baker 7 weeks into the season is an admission. This is from Michael Sean. An admission that one half of the experiment was a failure, talking about bringing in Baker and Dodson. Baker missed most of the offseason program with a hamstring injury, and even though he was able to return for the season opener, he aggravated the injury in week 2 and missed the next couple of weeks. He's had issues defending the intermediate part of the field and finding the ball against the run. And that's the thing. Jones is, we haven't really talked about the specifics of his game, but everything I can get my hands on, while he's not considered elite in any one area, He is considered a very solid run defender and a better coverage linebacker than Jerome Baker was.
Yeah, and that's kind of the big key thing. If you like, a couple of plays have really stood out for me in regards to Baker's time here. One was against the 49ers, and he's in coverage on George Kittle and loses him. And Kittle catches the sail route or flag route, whatever you want to call it, out and runs for an extra 20, 30 yards on it. And it's like, out of all the guys to let go, don't let George Kittle get by you. Like that's something for me where I'm just looking at, our coverage and in those kind of things, we've struggled covering the intermediate of the field. Yeah. And that's a big part of the Mike Macdonald, what he asks his linebackers to. You watch Raekwon Smith and Patrick Queen last year. They both had and were tasked with that, and they did well. No means all pros at it, but they did better than what we had been getting. And I think Ernest Jones is going to be an upgrade there. I think you're going to see the ability for us to do some more things that way that we weren't with Baker. And I think it's, if Ernest Jones ends up taking over the green dot, which I think is a possibility on this defense, I really do think it is, it might help Dodson play more free because it's a responsibility he hadn't had up until this season. I think that's something that's going to be a thing that potentially could happen after the bye week is Ernest Jones becomes the green dot, where Dotson gets a little bit of a relief of not having to make sure everything's right and can just go play freely in what he knows how to do best.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at PFF, like, Jones hasn't had his best year so far this year. He was ranked 46th overall for inside linebackers. I think just one spot ahead of Jerome Baker.
Yep.
And his run defense grade is 68.4. That's considered good, not great. His tackling grade is 65.7. That would certainly be an upgrade over what we saw from Jerome Baker. His coverage grade is 54. That's considered poor. But you look at last year and an 82.1 overall score, 90 as a run defender, 80.5 as a tackler. I think that's a big part of this deal. 78.2 as a pass rusher. He's a guy that can be used in those packages and get after the quarterback a little bit, 5.5 career sacks. So, man, you can just see he looks like a Mike Macdonald linebacker.
He does, and I think he fits that role really well, and I think we may have started to see the development. Again, this is something I've alluded to on our show with Ryan and our guests, and I've talked to you about it, Dan, is everyone was so quick after that losing streak to judge this defense and stuff. And there were a lot of pieces on this that were not Mike Macdonald personnel fits and scheme fits. Now you're starting to see them go out, identify. Yeah, they identified Baker as a potential scheme fit and it failed. Let's go get a guy that we can already see in this scheme what he looks like. Let's go get him and bring him in.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to remember is in the offseason, and at one point, I can't remember if it was Macdonald or Schneider, and there was a lot of reporting done around this as well, that they really targeted smart football players. They knew that changing to this scheme would take some mental acuity, and more so than just athletes, they were looking for guys that could adapt quickly. And they identified Baker as one of those guys. I think what we saw on the field, maybe he was, maybe from the neck up, he was, that type of player, but just the physical part of it. And maybe it is just injuries have robbed it a little bit. He just didn't look like a guy that could impact a game as an every down starter.
No, I agree with you 100%. And that's going to be, it's going to be interesting, man. Like, Dan, this is probably one of the days I've been most excited for Seahawk news in quite some time, with the Lucas and Fant news, this, ability of this new, group of organizational pieces to go and identify issues, self-scout. Yeah. I think that's been a big issue with Seattle, is the self-scouting. And that's something now that we're seeing is changing. And we get Abe Lucas back soon. We get George Fant. If Mike Jarrell turns into being a bit of a player, and this Seahawk team is starting to look like they can take a step going forward this season. Now, I'm not saying this means that they're going to be 12 wins like I had projected earlier with the 3-0 start, that, hey, maybe they get to 12 wins. But I could see this being a team that may have a better chance now at potentially pushing for the division, especially with the banged upness of the rest of the NFC West.
Yeah, and I think it signals how serious they are about competing now, and I think it signals an internal honesty, because when you compare it to like the move they made to go out and be aggressive and get Leonard Williams last year, well, universally, we all knew they needed more help up front. They needed another guy up front. And so when they acquired Leonard Williams, nobody was asking like, where's he going to play or whose job is he going to take? I mean, he's just that dude. But to move a starter for another guy to take his place at this juncture of the season, I think tells me something. And I'm not sure, like to your point, I'm not sure this is a Pete Carroll type move. Like he was very loyal to his guys. I'm not so sure there's another move today that if I'd woken up and read the news would have excited me more than this move that they made today.
100% agree, Dan. Like this is a big news.
What do you guys got coming up on the show? You going to do anything before the game?
Yeah. So over at the Hawks Zone Rundown, me and Ryan, we're actually going to do a live show later today. That's going to kind of jump into some of this news as well and have Ryan's reaction to what's going on as well. And then Saturday we have Jonas from the German Seahawks. Nice. Going to come on the show. We're going to preview the Bills game, get that out to the listeners and that before that. And yeah, that's kind of what we got coming up recently. And we just had started our new segment with Mookie Alexander from Field Goals, Pulse of the Hawks. So that's a new thing every 2 weeks that we'll have out on Monday nights.
If you guys haven't checked out the Hawks Zone Rundown yet with Ryan and Bryce, get over there and do it and subscribe. You guys are getting so close to 1,000 subscribers. I think I saw you at pushing 800 the other day. Let's get them to 1,000. That's when a lot of things open up for their channel and they're able to do a lot more things, which will be really cool. Here's an interesting one. You mentioned Cleveland earlier.
Oh no.
What about a Myles Garrett trade?
Oh, I would love that, Dad.
Right?
I don't want to know what the compensation would be.
Well, because it'd be a rental.
It would be.
That's a guy that you wouldn't be looking to sign after this year, I don't think. Let's see, 29 years old now. He said earlier this season that he'd have to have surgery on both of his feet, I think, in the offseason.
Yeah.
Boy, he's got a weird deal. He's got 5 void years at the end of his deal. Yeah, similar situation to the Buda Baker thing. He's got 20 million. His cap hit this year is 20 million. So a little over, 1.1 per week. So it would suck up just about everything you had left in cap space if you were to make that move.
If there was a move Seattle would make, like my dream move for Seattle to make, and this would be something that they could make and somehow keep this player around, I would love to see Seattle go get Max Crosby. I love that guy. I love his attitude.
You and everybody else that
would be my dream if Seattle could somehow swing that. I know it's not a reality, but that if we're talking about, dream potential things like Myles Garrett, like I want Max Crosby because I just love the way he plays the game and just everything about that dude. And he would be my dream trade, extend, build defense around with, other pieces kind of thing. Can you imagine a defense with Max Crosby and Witherspoon on it and the amount of vocalization that would happen with that group?
Yeah, it would be. I think that's the one that would break the internet when it comes to
it would completely
Seahawks fans and Twitter and everything else. Yeah, his cap hit this year is $30 million. But remember, you can do things. The Seahawks did this last year with Leonard Williams. They gave a higher draft pick to the Giants, and the Giants ate some money. The Raiders are in that position where I think they've already done it, in trading away Devontae Adams and admitting to themselves that they need to be full rebuild, go get a quarterback next year, commit to that. And so maybe the timeline of a guy like Max Crosby just doesn't fit what they want. I mean, he's a guy that would require multiple first-round draft picks probably. It would probably look something similar to what the Seahawks gave up to get Jamal Adams a few years ago, if not more. Is that something you're willing to do if they would buy down some of that money so you could bring him into the fold? Would you trade 2 first-round draft picks for Max Crosby if he was available?
Ooh, if Max Crosby was available and I was guaranteed to get a contract extension out of it, I might because the impact that player has. And, it may sound crazy to some fans and they may think I'm out of my mind, but when you can get that impactful rusher that, like, we're talking like a premier top level guy, the defenses truly have to go, we can't leave this guy on block for a second, and he commands that much of a presence. that's where you see some of your other guys feed off of that. And, if we, because we would have Hall and Mafe potentially, but, who knows, we'd have to give one of them up in the trade. But if we were able to keep them to go with Crosby, you think about the amount of single teams either one of those two would get. It would be a dream situation. I just know it's not a reality, sadly. And I have to listen to my wife all the time and my buddy tell me how great and how much they love Max Crosby. And I'm sitting there as a Seahawks fan going, he looks so much better in green and blue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at it this way. His cap hit in 2025 would be $28 million. Uchenna Nwosu's cap hit in 2025 is 21.5. Like, you could, if obviously we're just having some fun here. If you acquired Max Crosby, he's under contract for 2 more seasons beyond this. And actually this year is his biggest cap hit. And it goes down a little bit from, I think, to 28, I said next year, and then 24 the year after. He's still only 27 years old. Like, I mean, maybe they would take Nwosu in the deal. He's going to be healthy in a couple of weeks, presumably. Or he's, as you said, maybe you have to give up a Hall or a Mafe, which if you're getting Max Crosby, you'd certainly be willing to do. And then you would release Nwosu in the offseason if you couldn't trade him. It's doable. It's crazy. You're giving up draft capital, obviously. Yeah. But if you feel good enough about this roster and the impact he could have on it, this team could probably survive without a first-round pick the next couple of years.
This is true.
Well, that was fun, right?
Was.
One last check. I just don't want to miss anything else. It happens to. I mean, here's some NFL news. Carolina Panthers are going back to Bryce Young in week 8.
And that was something I saw a lot of people saying, could he be a trade piece at the deadline? Like, GMs were talking like, hey, is Carolina going to put him up on the trade block to move him? Here's something Mookie Alexander put out that's kind of interesting. He goes, Seahawks probably need some extra safety help with Jenkins on IR. If the Titans are having a fire sale, is Quandre Diggs an option to bring back?
Well, last week everybody wanted to sign Jamal Adams.
Oh, I know.
I think
I'm good with. I'd rather see, to be honest, Ty Okada play. I think he fits in some respects, and I think Mike McDonald likes him. I'm good with rolling with Wallace and Love and Bryant and Okada for a couple of weeks. And like we said, Jenkins' deal is really a 1-year deal. Like if Bryant and Okada play well, I don't know if Jenkins is even back next year.
Yeah. Let me see. Still no clarification on which of the 4th round picks, and they might not even be able to say that yet because you can't. So comp picks can be traded now, but comp picks haven't been awarded yet for 2025. So it's possible that the 2 teams agreed that the 4th round pick the Seahawks would be sending is the comp pick rather than their own native pick. In which case they can't officially announce that until comp picks are awarded. Let me play this really quick. This is interesting. Daniel Jeremiah in his weekly spot on Seattle Sports 710 this morning had this to say about the linebacker position just before news was announced that that Jones was traded to the Seahawks. And I should be able to get this through on the mixer. Were you able to hear that okay?
Actually, I wasn't able to hear it at all.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm getting for the comments too. So sorry about the dead air, you guys. I'm not quite sure. I hear it in my headset. It should have come through the mixer. So sorry about that. Basically, though, this is right before the Ernest Jones trade. What you heard there, or what you would have heard there, is Brock Heward asking, is that position good enough, basically, for the Seahawks? And Jeremiah saying, I think they're going to invest heavily in that position to acquire somebody. And then, moments later they go out and get Ernest Jones. It's why DJ is one of the best in the business. Just that kind of insight. And he's tapped in with guys around the league too. Pretty darn cool. Sorry about that, you guys.
Did you see one other thing with NFL news? Did you see who was walking around Green Bay practices?
No.
Robert Saleh is at the Green Bay Packers, and he's got the connection with Matt LaFleur.
Interesting.
And so I wonder if he's at some point potentially gotten hired as a defensive consultant, maybe, because I don't know how that works with his contract, but there's a team that's a contending team. They're going to be in Seattle in a bit. Robert Saleh's had some pretty good defenses over the years, especially when he was in San Francisco with talent. And that Jets defense was even playing well this year. That's interesting to me that he's at Green Bay and potentially could be helping out that defense when they're going to be in Seattle and, later on this year.
Yeah. Really interesting, especially in light of the fact that he said he probably wasn't going to coach anywhere this year and just kind of take the year. But, sometimes you get that itch. You step away and you think you're cool and you can take a breath, but the game draws you back, right? And so does money.
Yep. That's usually a good driving force.
Although he's getting paid to do nothing. So, all right. I think that's going to do it, man. I appreciate you jumping on and taking the time. I'm glad you were available to hop on this with me and break all this down.
Anytime.
That's Bryce, again, from the Hawks Zone Rundown podcast. Head over to their YouTube channel and subscribe. I will be back with a formal preview of the Bills game either tomorrow or Friday, and then look for my live reaction after the Bills game on Sunday once I get back from the stadium at Lumen Field. Big game coming up. Again, shout out to BetUS and Manscaped for sponsoring this live stream. Thanks again to Bryce. You can follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you get notification of future episodes. All the other ways to support the show are down below in the description. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.